classroom that housed the mostly older children was in a dual state of confusion, pandemonium coupled with fear. Everyone had heard the shooting going on inside the school, starting with the headmaster, Mr. Reed's office. The kids knew those sounds. After all, there was a rifle range close by. More shots rang out, and then Miss Kendon, the teacher from next door, screamed for the children to all get outside. The 13-year-old Kelvin McLean sat paralysed with fear at his desk as a 6-foot man he recognised approached him, pistol in hand. "You won't hurt me, Mr. Higgins. Remember, I used to help you with your firewood." The blank-faced attacker said nothing. He first shot Kelvin McLean in the left leg, sending him sprawling. As he lay on the schoolroom floor crying out for his mother, Higgins approached and at point-blank range fired again. Earlier that day, Sarah McGarry was walking to school. It was a sunny Friday, and the 13-year-old was thinking about the weekend and getting to school on time. Mr. Reed was a stickler for punctuality. Up the road behind her came Mr. Higgins with his wood cart, his elder son walking in tandem. Higgins drew his wood-laden cart beside her, and after discussing her mother, who was ill at the time, in a detached voice he offered her a ride into town. She had sometimes hitched a ride to school with him in the past, but that day she declined his offer. 2 hours later, Sarah became Higgins' next target, shot again in the leg. Waikino is a small town about 10 kilometres down the road from the larger town of Waihi, the home of New Zealand's largest gold ore battery. The Waikino population has hovered between 200 to 400 as the fortunes of gold mining and farming ebbed and waned. In 1923 the school roll was 123 and today it's 70 odd. As a blatant tourist plug for the town, there is one of New Zealand's best boozers there and an historic railway running out of the same station as this one. John Christopher Higgins purchased his Waihi rural property in around 1908. An immigrant from Canada, he was accompanied by his wife. The year after they had their first son. Higgins made his living selling firewood, and whilst not rude, he liked to keep himself to himself. Behind his polite but gruff exterior was a deeply troubled, paranoid man, a paranoia that only grew as years went by. His self-built homestead resembles something out of a 1980s horror film. Anyway, to paint you a better picture as to the state of his mental health, Higgins had cut spy holes in the outside walls, also built an escape tunnel and a secret trapdoor beneath the floor in case of attack. To make the house even more spookier, it always had its drapes drawn because he believed the neighbours were spying on him. The belief by Higgins he was subject to a neighbourhood vendetta grew and grew. Some of his chicken died. The neighbours must have come in and done that. The fence was found down. The neighbours must have pulled it down. Next, they were coming to kill my horses, so I'd better get one of the boys to sleep in the barn. Hostile neighbours are regularly stealing my bees. And what did the locals think of this eccentric in their midst? Well, the locals had whimsically nicknamed him Mad John, an odd chap, but perfectly harmless. By 1923, the Higgins had 2 sons, the elder mentioned teenager and a much younger 6-year-old. Both of those children fell foul of the education department due to their attendance record, or lack thereof. The short fuse was lit the day one of his horses was found dead. One guess who he thought was to blame. And that was the final straw as far as he was concerned, and he was going to teach the town a lesson. At 10 o'clock that morning, Robert Reed heard his dog Pax barking outside his office. Pax was not only the Reeds' family dog, he came to work as the de facto school mascot. Opening the window, he spotted Higgins standing outside. Being a small town, both Reed and Higgins were familiar with each other. "I'm after revenge," muttered Higgins. Reed was unaware at this point Higgins was armed and ushered him into his office. Here's the layout of the school. Just after entering the office, Higgins pulled out his pistol. Reed astutely judged the situation. Revenge meant he was here to harm the children. As Higgins rambled on and on about his neighbours and this and that, Reid suggested he go down to the mine instead, where most of the men work, and have it out with him there. He'd even take him to the police in Waihi so he could outlay his complaints formally, to which he received a reply as to which way this was going. "I have come here to die, but I'm not afraid to stand in front of my God." When his deflection tactics had failed to calm Higgins down, in an extreme act of bravery, Reid told Higgins, "You'll have to shoot me before the children." Higgins' reply was rather blank. He told Reid, "You give me no choice. If you will have it, you will take it." He pointed the gun and shot him. The bullet entered his shoulder, exited and hit him in the jaw. Going in and out of consciousness and unable to yell due to the blood in his mouth, Reid collapsed. Brushing past Miss Kendon in charge of the kids in the first class, he paused briefly to fire randomly into the classroom before his killing spree in the second, largely older classroom began. Kendon and the two other probationary teachers were now yelling for the children to literally run for their lives. It was in the second room the carnage would occur. "I'll have to kill you all," he ranted. Pointing the Colt, he shot Charles Stewart, a 9-year-old sitting in the second row, in the head. Stewart died instantly. Next to die was Kelvin McLean, which appeared to be a targeted murder. Children were shot as they ran for safety, clambered through windows, and the teachers hustled them away as best they could, away from the madness. 6 children in total were shot. 15 minutes after it started, 3 bodies lay inside the school. The only other occupant was the perpetrator. The 4 other wounded, plus the other terrified children and teachers, having been taken to safety. The schoolhouse was now surrounded by the menfolk of the town, brandishing shotguns, rifles and anything else they could fashion. Higgins retreated inside Reid's office. Barricading himself in, he knew a firefight was about to start, and he was up for it. Meanwhile, Reid lay on the floor of his own office, feigning death. And the angry lynch mob asked him to come out, threatening they would burn the place down if necessary, to which Higgins replied to the effect, "I'm going to die anyway." Next on the scene were the 2 policemen from Waihi, Sergeant O'Grady and Constable Olson, who, seeing the lynch mob, urged Higgins to throw his gun out and surrender. He replied simply by opening fire. This was met by a volley of return fire. On and off the firefight lasted for 30 minutes, in which Constable Olson was wounded when a miner had partly prized open the door, only to find Higgins behind it. In the end, it was O'Grady that pushed the door fully open and found Higgins armed only with a knife. "It's all over," Higgins said. Handcuffed, he was led out of the schoolhouse and was then promptly set upon by the crowd. The only photo I could find of him was the one sporting a broken nose. Black Friday, as the locals were to call it, wasn't quite over yet. 2 children were killed. Peter Shaw on the right was shot in the elbow. The less fortunate Kelvin McLean is on the left. 4 were wounded. Sarah McGarry from the intro is on the very right, and she would walk with a limp for the rest of her life. Amongst the wounded was Peter McKinney, aged 8, who was shot in the elbow. Then we also, of course, had the headmaster, Mr. Reid, who spent a week in hospital before he was even able to give the police a statement. His arm was never the same, and he gave up teaching immediately after this occurred. Constable Olson was also shot, and he got it in the groin. Sounds ugly, but he went back to work. When the schoolhouse was searched, the police came across a nasty surprise. Besides having enough unused .32 rounds to continue the siege for longer, they found carefully wrapped in a newspaper were 3 sticks of gelignite, a fuse and a detonator. Blowing up the school with the kids inside was clearly in his plans. At the trial, Higgins appeared to be nice to the chap, muddled. Inevitably he was sentenced to hang and sent to Mount Eden prison. That was later commuted to life in prison, as he was judged to have been suffering a chronic delusional insanity. Higgins died in Avondale Mental Hospital in 1938, aged 72. In the fallout, two other events are worthy of recollection. Firstly, against the backdrop of protest from the locals, the Education Department quickly replaced the windows, spruced up the school, that's to say cleaned away the blood and puttied up the bullet holes, and then pronounced the school was back in business. The school then mysteriously burnt down one night. The town then used their hall in the interim whilst the new one was being built. Here's a photo of all the kids in their new temporary facility thanks to the Waikino Museum. Lastly, thanks to the fundraising efforts around the country run by the Truth magazine, Mrs. Higgins and her two sons were given enough funds to return to Canada. This remains New Zealand's one and only school shooting, and before I let you off so easily, and following on from this theme, I've covered two similar cases to this one, bonkers immigrants in NZ who have run amok. The 1914 Ruahine Axe Murders, from the title you know it's not going to be nice. Next is the 1927 Cadell family death pack involving an overbearing husband and some sort of familial psychosis. Links for those two below. Shout out to the regulars who keep this a happening place, this old semi-retired geezer, and certainly appreciate your support. I hope to see you next time when I hit the ton, my 100th video and a telegram from the Queen. Bye for now.